Then we want to talk a little bit about some of the major considerations, which I think are some of the more important ones. These are the considerations, what you see as your family, how you want to have your family. We're going to talk very briefly about traditional surrogacy versus gestational surrogacy. Just a brief definition, traditional surrogacy is where your egg donor is also your surrogate mother. We're going to talk about anonymous egg donation versus known egg donation. And we're going to talk about some of the medical decisions that you need to make, and then finally some of the ethical and the social considerations, which are truly some of the most important if you choose to do this. In the second part of our afternoon, we're going to talk about how to pick a provider, what you should look for, what some of the best research resources are. Whether you're going to find an agency directly or find a surrogate directly, independent surrogacy, how to find a clinic, how to find a donor, and also importantly, how to find an attorney, which we're going to focus on. Also, after this session, we're going to break off into country-specific sessions, and we're going to talk about, we have experts from different countries, legal experts, medical experts, to talk about how it applies to you specifically in your country of origin. And then the second part of the second agenda today, we're going to be talking about budgeting, very important discussion. Ron has done exhaustive work on creating basic Excel spreadsheets about what all of the costs involved are and how some of the best cost-saving practices can affect you. And then finally, I'm going to talk more specifically about our Gay Parenting Assistance Program so that you can understand it a little bit more. So let's talk about overview and terminology. So what is surrogacy? Surrogacy is the act of a woman, altruistic in nature, gestating the child of another individual or a couple with the intent of giving the child to the intended parents at birth. And I think this is one of the big controversies here in Europe. You hear the word altruistic. I know I live in New York State. We have a ban against surrogacy, but we don't have a ban against altruistic surrogacy. Altruistic surrogacy basically is defined as surrogacy without compensation. I will tell you that every single surrogate mother that I have ever spoken with, the vast majority have been compensated, but every single one of them has done it for a reason that has to do with love, that has to do with a sincere understanding of the gift that she is giving to somebody else by helping them have a family. So there are essentially two kinds of surrogacy that we're going to talk about. Those surrogacies are traditional surrogacy and gestational surrogacy, and there's two ways of going about it. There's independent surrogacy and agency surrogacy, and I'm going to go into those a little bit more specifically for you. Before I do that, I'm going to hand it over to Ron, and Ron's going to tell you a little bit about the parties that are involved in a gestational surrogacy journey. That's where you have a separate egg donor and a separate surrogate mom.
So just to also understand terminology, and by the way, we handed out the PowerPoint presentation document, which looks a little different. It has more details. Take it home and read it if you need later on. If somebody didn't get one, you can email me. We'll send you a PDF version. So it is, a lot of material, so some of this will be easier to digest in reading later on. Sometimes we use abbreviations. So for instance, when we talk about gestational surrogacy, sometimes we just use the letters GS. Intended parents, who are widely known as IPs, are obviously the first part of this process. This is where you start, the people who are desire to have a child. Some agencies would screen you. They would ask you some questions. They will have some acceptance criteria. We think they should all do that. But at the same time, we believe that everybody has the right to be a parent, but we understand that also the surrogate has to be protected. And then you have the egg donor. So as men, we don't have eggs. We use the letters ED sometimes to talk about egg donation or an egg donor. The egg donor requires either a fertility or an agency or a friend or family that could be the source for these eggs. Then we talk about the gestational carrier, more frequently just referred to as a surrogate or as a GC, not to could be confused with GS. To get a gestational carrier, you need somebody to help you find her. You need attorneys to draft the agreements with her, and we'll talk about maybe later on about where you can find those people. And then, of course, the baby or babies. Unfortunately, also the part of the baby requires attorneys because you'll need to bring the baby back home and make sure that you're the recognized parents of that baby, which we call parental establishment. So we'll talk about all these things later, but these are some of the acronyms we're going to be using. So now, what I'd like to talk about are just to give you like the lay of the land, like a map of how does this look like. So we think, we haven't mentioned that, by the way, but we have an initiative we call the Surrogacy Advisor that allows people to submit surveys after they finished their process and give us feedback about the process, also feedback about the service providers they used, including how much their expenses were and how long it took. Just by the way, I realized that one of the Belgian newspapers yesterday found on the website the list that's also in the back in one of the last 2 pages of your program, the list of our rating table, and they decided that that was a price list. And they said you can buy a baby for 130, for 80, for 90, and they literally published it in a Belgian newspaper saying that this is a list, a price list of babies that we're selling. But it's not. These are the results of surveys that we got. And one thing we know is that it takes about 1.5 years to have a child through surrogacy. You start by choosing typically, and we'll talk about the exceptions, choosing typically a surrogacy agency and a clinic. Sometimes together, sometimes one at a time. Sometimes an agency would suggest a clinic. They would start immediately looking for a surrogate for you. That may take a while. And let me just mention that we are talking about the United States. We have we have an agency in the clinic this time also from Canada. The process is very similar there, not exactly the same. We're not talking about any other destination at this point. So at this point, there will be, you'll be waiting basically, and at the time when the surrogate is located, there will be the contracts and the matching process during which you meet her. Many times people go and visit her in her home. And at that point, the clinic kicks in again, and that's when you start doing some of the medical screening, first and foremost for her. And at some point, then the egg donor match has also to be completed because it takes less time to find an egg donor. And so many times they would ask you to wait until you have a gestational carrier selected to finalize at least, or even to start looking at a particular donor out of their database. And we'll talk about the exceptions. Some people use a family member as well. At that point, when everybody's lined up and ready, the clinic will try to get everybody on the schedule and start giving medications to prepare everybody. There will be then what we call the retrieval. And my colleague George is going to talk about all these things in a little more detail. And then we'll have, I should mention also, an expert panel at 2 o'clock where each of the 4 groups here would hear from a doctor in more details about those things. So we will go back to many of the topics we mentioned now at least once or maybe twice later on. So this is just an overview. So what we call a retrieval is when the eggs are being retrieved. Typically 5 days after that, there'll be the transfer, where the eggs that have now become fertilized and became embryos are being transferred into the surrogate. And then after that, there will be, God willing, a positive pregnancy test in a few days. During that time, the agency is supposed to provide certain coordination, of course, and support throughout the process. Once the first trimester, the first 3 months of the pregnancy are finished, usually the clinic is out of the picture, and the surrogate is then going to the care of her own doctor, where she lives. Very few surrogates live close to where the fertility clinic is, as it turns out. There'll be some legal preparation and other preparation for the birth taking place in due course, and hopefully, regular maternity care and the birth. It should be mentioned that statistically, if you transfer one embryo, you have almost 50% chance that you will not be pregnant the first time. If you transfer two, or maybe is it 40% now? If you transfer two, there's some chance that you will need to do another transfer, which is then approximately 30%. So all this could happen twice or more if you're not successful in the first attempt. Yes, Anthony, take us through some of the legal steps.
Okay, so surrogacy in the United States is literally a state-by-state issue. As I'd mentioned before, in New York, compensated surrogacy is illegal. My husband and I, we have a 5.5-year-old son, and our surrogate mother gave birth in North Carolina, but lived in Virginia. So we had to address what would happen if she gave birth in Virginia and what would happen if she gave birth in North Carolina. So essentially, when you're choosing your surrogate, if you're using an agency, the agency is going to do the legal research for you about the laws in the state where your surrogate mom is going to give birth. If you're doing it independently, you need to contact an attorney in the state where your surrogate mother is going to give birth, who is versed in assisted reproduction law and surrogacy law, particularly in that state. But the first legal interface that you're going to have, and I'm going to speak a little bit more about agency surrogacy, is you're signing a contract, you and your partner, or you if you're doing the journey on your own, signing the contract with the agency. This is the one part of the journey where you guys are unrepresented. The agency is going to try to provide for all of the contingencies in their relationship with you, but a lot of it is complicated because money is changing hands. They want to make sure that they're protected. I want to make sure that you're protected, that you understand what you're getting into. So if you have any questions about a contract with an agency, you have every right to ask them to amend it. You have every right to clarify it. You have every right to ask for referrals from them of clients that they have worked with if there's a particular issue to get around. But that's the first legal interface that you're going to have. If you're working with an agency, from that point on, once you're engaged with the agency, they will be representing you in the process with your surrogate mother. They will also probably be coordinating the legal representation of your egg donor and your surrogate mother as well. So they handle those aspects, but they will then represent you in that process. And the final briefly I want to mention, which is probably the most important thing, is the establishment of parental rights for the non-biological father. And in Europe, also, if you're having your child in America, the establishment of citizenship for your child back in your own home country. I'm going to refer to the panels that we have later on, the country-specific panels that we have later on, because we have attorneys who are versed in that aspect of it. But usually it involves, at least in the United States, something called a pre-birth order, which establishes the parental rights of the biological father. Many states and many countries also have a different set of criteria if your surrogate mother is married, and the husband of the surrogate mother also has to sign a denial of paternity upon the birth of the child, as the pre-birth order creates the paternity for the biological father. Okay? All right, so let's talk about some, I love that picture, some of the major questions before we get started in it. And the first question is whether you want to do this as an independent journey or whether you want to do it as an agency journey. I have such respect for people who do this independently. They are the most organized people in the world. They have to corral so many people. And just to be honest with you, from a logistical point of view, probably that kind of journey for someone here, coordinating it in America, it's going to be twice as hard. It can be done, though, and I want to mention, just if you are considering doing it on your own, because one of the cost-saving measures that we'll talk about is to remove the agency fee, you will be finding your surrogate independently. You can find them through friends. You can find them online. There are online websites that you can go to. Just make sure you do your research with them. Research the website, and if you can get any referrals, if you can find a surrogate mother who has already been a surrogate mother before, that can be a great help also. You need to find the professionals independently. You need to locate the clinic for the transfer. You need to, or the agency if they're going to be doing donor matching for you. You have to find the attorney who's going to draft the surrogacy contract for you. That attorney has to be well-versed in the laws of the state where the carrier is going to give birth, but you also have to find an attorney to represent the carrier as well. And the one element in independent surrogacy that George may speak to also is the sort of psychosocial support network that both you and your surrogate mother need, and oftentimes your egg donor if you want to have a relationship, a known donor and a relationship with them. I know from personal experience when our carrier got pregnant, she got pregnant with twins, and one of the twins died. And we had an agency that provided a social worker for both us and for our surrogate mother. And it was a really difficult situation, something that was unanticipated. We had heard about the possibilities, you know, when you've heard the joke, when you plan on having children, you plan on nothing because everything can go up in the air. There are always going to be changes, but that aspect of it was very helpful for us, to have in place social workers who were able to deal with the situations that came up. With an agency surrogacy, the agency is going to be doing the screening and the matching, and they're going to be providing that support for the parties. They also act as a liaison between the parties. If something comes up, we'll talk a little bit later about surrogacy contracts, which try to provide for every possible outcome. Something may come up inevitably, and you may need to do some kind of negotiation with an agency. They'll provide that liaison capacity. The agency works with the clinic to coordinate with the parties for the retrieval and the transfer. The agency will draft or arrange for the drafting of the surrogacy contracts, and they usually handle coordinating with attorneys to establish the parental rights of the non-biological parent. The work that I do in New York is that. I do the parental establishment, second step parent adoptions for couples that have left New York but live in New York to have their children with surrogates elsewhere. Let me talk just very, very briefly about traditional surrogacy versus gestational surrogacy. Traditional surrogacy, again, there's no need for an egg donor. Your egg donor is your surrogate mother. There is no need for IVF. IVF is in vitro fertilization. George will tell you a little bit more about that specifically, but it is a much more expensive process. With a traditional surrogate, you can have artificial insemination, intrauterine insemination, turkey baster, fresh direct, some people call it. However, the more natural you get, the more time can be involved in that. So it's not necessarily going to be a faster experience for you. It can be more affordable, but traditional surrogacy provides many of the same costs as gestational surrogacy. And you can't count on it being a less expensive venture. But one of the benefits of it also is that your children are going to know their biological mother. And the trend that I am seeing now in the United States is that most intended parents want to have a continued relationship with their surrogate mother, mostly always with their surrogate mother, but many, myself included, with their egg donor as well. With a gestational surrogacy, the surrogate and the egg donor can be the best for each role, essentially. There are many more egg donors to choose from than surrogates. So if you are trying to approximate your relationship, the ethnicity of the biological father and the non-biological father. Find somebody who meets your own specific criteria. With a separate egg donor, there's more of a chance of doing that. Also, and this was very significant in our situation, it was much easier for our surrogate mother to be able to surrender the parental rights of the child that she gave birth to because she didn't have a biological relationship with the child. That was an emotional barrier for her. Even though she understood from the beginning what our relationship was, and we had a great relationship that was open and honest, she did say that it made it easier for her because it wasn't her own biological child. Also, legal reasons, and particularly for the establishment of the parental rights of the non-biological father back in your home country. If it's a traditional surrogate and there's that biological relationship, there may be a harder time in establishing those parental rights, or more specifically, terminating the rights of the traditional surrogate when you come back to do an adoption in your home country. And finally, with the gestational surrogate, there may be, and this is up to you, there may be less ambiguity about the role of the surrogate in your life. Like I said before, I think many members of our organization have continued to have really positive relationships with the women who have helped us have families. And I would imagine it would probably be the same for you. So I'm going to pass this off to George, who's going to talk a little bit about egg donors, known egg donors versus anonymous egg donors. George?
Hi, again, my name is Georges Sylvestre. I'm a member of the board of Men Having Babies, and I view my participation in this group both as a gay biodad, but also as an obstetrician and gynecologist, because I deliver babies for a living. And I don't do fertility work, but my specialty is high-risk pregnancies. But I try to advise all of you, any questions you may have, you're welcome to email me or to post them to me today when it comes to medical aspects. But if you think that the legal, political aspects of surrogacies are complicated, well, the medical ones are very, very complex as well. But don't worry, you don't have to understand fully everything that's going on, because it can be complex. When it comes to choosing your egg donor, generally, you want to ask yourself, do I want a known donor versus an anonymous donor? And it all depends on what you want and what you wish for yourself and for your child. For instance, I know some friends of mine, and probably some of you, that really want to have some relationship with the egg donor. Sometimes just to the point that they want to have met before the egg donation process, but others will say, not only I want to have met you, but I want you to be part of my life and part of my child's life. And at my child, when she's or he's 18, I want him to know the full rights and to have a continued relationship with you. So it's a lot more complicated when you make not these demands, but have these criteria, because not all egg donors will be willing to have an ongoing relationship. They might be willing to have a relationship with you around the time of the donation, but then say, well, my life will go on. I'll get married and have my own children, and the last thing I want at age 15 and somebody knocking my door says like, oh, I'm your son. I'd like to have a relationship with you because you're my egg donor. So some it will be okay with, because some egg donors would want that, but a lot of them won't. A lot of them would rather have either a brief relationship or a non-relationship, which is the case with anonymous egg donor. So with a known egg donor, a donor that you pick and that you may know personally, you have a better personal impression of her, who she's like. And if you're going to continue to have a long-term relationship with her, if she is to develop, say, breast cancer, or her mother will, you'll have a better grasp of a medical history at the time of the donation and further along in the process as well. And again, there's the advantage of her being able to meet the children should you want to do so. When you have an anonymous egg donor, I understand that in many countries in Europe, anonymous egg donation is the one and only way, if I'm not mistaken. Some countries may allow non-anonymous egg donation, but I think the majority of European countries prefer to go the anonymous route. When you find yourself an anonymous egg donor, you usually have a profile with some pictures as babies, children as adults, and it's usually less complicated and less legal restrictions. Also, keep in mind that you should not intellectualize this too much, okay? Because having a child, it's like kind of a shot in the dark. And there's only so much you can control. If you start thinking, I want an egg donor who's 5'11", who likes strawberries, who likes red, who likes music to Chopin, and I want her to be in this area of Lithuania, you're going to find yourself with a very, very hard time finding an egg donor. At the same time, I have intended parents that said, oh, well, there's a lot of diabetes in my family and cancer, so I want an egg donor who has no cancer or diabetes or high blood pressure in the family. Well, that's impossible. So have your self-realistic expectations. When it comes to beauty, I've seen beautiful parents with ugly children and vice versa. It's all very subjective. So much of the child will become pretty much has very little to do with genetics. Typical medical choices when it comes to egg donation that you have to do. Fresh, share, frozen. Now, fresh donation, if you have the option of finding yourself your own egg donor that you will not share. Typically, I know you're gay, but you may know that women ovulate 1 egg per month normally. When it comes to an egg donor, what we do is that we boost her with medication, I mean, not me, but the fertility specialist, so that she can produce between 15 and 25 eggs to make ovaries the size of cantaloupes. And that after this treatment with medication, they go retrieve these eggs under anesthesia, under local sedation, poke needles in the vagina, and retrieve all these 15 to 25 eggs. And hopefully, you have as many as possible. Then you fertilize the eggs, and then typically you can have half to 2/3 fertilizing what we call good quality embryos. So you can have a fresh or shared cycle. What you want to do, it depends on your situation. Since an egg donor will produce between 15 and 25 eggs, if you're single, say, and you want 1 child, one of the cost-saving measures would be to share a cycle with another couple like you or another person like you. So this other party will keep half the eggs and you keep half the eggs for yourself. So if you don't have, say, I know some people that I know I wanted to have particularly a certain sex of baby, so it already eliminates half of the eggs that they retrieve. So if you are to share your eggs with another party, so you're basically going to have 1/4 of the eggs left for you if you've decided to go to that route. You'll also have to make a decision about single and multiple embryo transfer. That's a biggie. That's a big one. And fortunately, we are in the best category when it comes to IVF, because the IVF data in terms of success rate per embryos, 97% of it pertains to the typical IVF couple that come and see me in the office, which is an older straight couple that have been trying to get pregnant for 6 years. They're 37, they had a bunch of miscarriages. So these are not easy IVF cases, but these are the typical IVF cases. In your case, you've got young eggs. Remember, if I haven't said it already, the younger, the better. And it works exponentially. A 19-year-old donor is much, 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 much better than a 30-year-old donor. Even 30 is still very young, but that's just the way it is when it comes to reproduction. So when you are in gestational surrogacy egg donation, we have the best case scenario. We have like very healthy eggs with very healthy dad, with a healthy uterus that absolutely no reproductive problems at all. So our chance of success when it comes to IVF surrogacy is one of the best. Okay, so if you transfer 1 embryo, and I'm giving you pictures which are not exact, okay, which change from clinic to clinic, but say the chance of pregnancy if you transfer 1 embryo is roughly 55%. Okay, of a pregnancy, which will be singleton. If you can transfer to embryo, the chance may increase a little bit, something like 65%. Although some of the recent studies say that the success rate per transfer is now the same between single and multiple embryo transfer, but it's still up for debate. So nevertheless, it's still an important decision you have to make. And if you want to have that yourself, this say, 10% or 15% increase in being pregnant by transferring two embryos, it comes with the risk of twins of about 40%. And that is not insignificant. When it comes to the risk of twins, you have to think in relative terms, because in all this parenthood surrogacy business, the only thing you can control is about that. It's how many embryos you transfer. If you're going to buy yourself this risk of twins versus not. And when it comes to risk of a twin pregnancy versus one, the risk for the pregnancy of late miscarriage, of prematurity, of cerebral palsy, or even death is about 3 to 5 times higher in twins compared to a singleton. And as much as I've been doing this for 20 years as a high-risk OB, I can never predict who will have these poor outcomes. So if you want to go the least risky route for you and your surrogate, a lot of people will go towards single embryo transfer. Now, when it comes to prenatal, the genetic screening of the embryos, in 2015, I would like to tell you that but all these embryos that are created, okay, after hopefully 5 days, what we can do is to pick one cell of this embryo, analyze it, and not only know if it's a boy or a girl, which is not that important for most of you, but if the embryo is chromosomally normal, because there's a very high percentage of created embryos actually chromosomally abnormal, have an extra chromosome, or that are lacking a chromosome. We all have hopefully 46 chromosomes, but if you have one extra or missing one, it's not going to produce a good pregnancy outcome. So about 10 to 20% roughly of the embryos created have some genetic anomaly. So some people think that looking at the embryos under the microscope between 3 to 5 days, you'll be able to tell those who are good versus bad, and we don't need to pick a cell to figure this out. So all I'm trying to say, I'd like to tell you that by picking one cell, I'm going to improve the pregnancy rate before I place the embryos in, but it's not the case, unfortunately. PGS or PGD, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, in this 2015 has not been shown to increase, to improve the IVF outcomes. And I wish I could tell you otherwise. Maybe in 5 years things will be different, but not today. In the States, we recommend PGS to be done on our typical IVF patients who've had multiple miscarriages or multiple IVF failures. So for the most cases, in your case, since you have healthy embryos, in most cases it's not clinically indicated. Now I'll turn it off to Ron.
Yep. So you have a lot of decisions to make, but like you have people like George and others to help you make the medical decisions. And certainly you don't have to remember everything. You see here that you'll have these discussions again and again. But we think that before you embark on this journey, you have to ask yourself several questions that would be very, very helpful to basically have some sort of a way to make those decisions. Because you have a lot of smaller decisions, and if you decide on the principles first, if you, especially if you're a couple, if you're part of a couple and you want to make sure that both of you have discussed several issues before you embark on this journey. So one of the first things, obviously, is what is your vision? What do you think will be your family is going to be like? Is it going to have, are you the kind of people who think that a family with one child is not complete? Will you insist on having more than one child even if you don't have, let's say, even if you're trying for twins, if you don't have twins? Or is it, or what you desire is to be a parent, and even if it's just one child? As I mentioned, how many surrogacy journeys you think you might be willing to go through if you're thinking of having more than one child? Those are the kind of things that may seem premature to discuss, but it is something that will, bear on decisions such as, do I want to freeze embryos? Do I want to, how many eggs do I would like to have? Because you can share eggs with somebody else. For instance, as George mentioned, if you want to have more children in the future and you want to freeze embryos for that purpose, then that is one of the decisions you need to make on your first journey. As it turns out, we only need one sperm source for each baby. And if you're a couple, you'll need to decide how to go about that. Is one of you, less, desires more to be a biological dad than the other? Would you like to both become biological dads? If you are creating several embryos, you can create some embryos that are biologically from the first dad and others from the other dad. Use some for the first baby, others for the others for the other baby, or even if you're going for twins, use one of each. Those are not the kind of decisions you'd not want to discuss ahead of time. When it comes to this journey, there's a lot of, relationships. You're talking about something you're doing with a lot of people. You want to make sure that you have a vision about what kind of relationship you want to have with a surrogate. There are surrogates out there that have done it once already. It's not a big deal as it was for them for the first time. They would like to be friends with you, but they don't want to, they don't want to be your Facebook friends, or they don't want to come visit you for the holidays every year or something. If that's your vision, then you need to think about it, because then a good agency will be able to find you a surrogate that has the same vision as you do. So between the two of you, you need to decide how do you feel about this before you start the process. The same about the donor, so it's what we discussed before, the known versus unknown, and types of, you can have a donor that is known, or at least you know her, but you still don't have a relationship with her. There are a lot of instances where your risk tolerance is going to come to play, because there will be decisions where you need to make that would perhaps have the potential of saving you some costs, but have the risk of maybe not working out and therefore might end up costing more later on. So there are opportunities for you sometimes to pay more upfront and insure yourself, so to speak, with options of multiple IVF packages, etc. So you want to think about this. I mean, are you the kind of person who's willing to risk things like that, or is it something that you want to, be more secure about? How much hand-holding and support do you need? So Anthony spoke about independent surrogacy, something that is very difficult in the United States, even more difficult if you're doing it from Europe. But even when you're talking about surrogacy with an agency, and we'll talk about it in more details later on, there are different types of agencies, different types of services you can get. You need to ask yourself, are you the kind of person who needs more hand-holding, more support, or you are more hands-on yourself and would like to do things a little bit more on your own, or in a combination of the two? And then there will be instances where you would need to make decisions that would have the nature of time versus cost decision. So there'll be a trade-off sometimes of paying more, but going a little faster. For instance, we highly recommend that you ask a surrogacy agency for a surrogate that has good health insurance. So you live in a continent where everybody has good health care, but in the United States, some people have none, others have better or not so good health insurance. And to have a surrogate that has good health insurance sometimes would take longer, but it could save money. So there'll be several instances where your preference of, are you in a hurry? Do you feel like you're getting too old already or something, or you have just general impatience and you're willing to sometimes pay more for that? Or is it something that you should maybe prepare yourself that there'll be instances where you can save money by having more patience? I think what we were going to do now, before we move to adoption, is we're going to talk about the issue, and then the issues that could help you have a smoother journey. Yeah, and then I'll talk to them.
Okay, thanks. So this, to me personally, is probably some of the most important information about the nuts and bolts of negotiating this process in your relationship, because it really is a personal process. A surrogate mother is not a service provider. She's a person, and she is doing something absolutely amazing for you. And the problems that I have heard come up many of them have stemmed from the intended parent's failure to really understand that concept. The surrogate mother is not doing this journey in a vacuum. She's going home to her community. She is being supported by her family. If she's married, her husband is laying next to her every night watching her get pregnant, knowing that that's not her child. And that support for her is something that needs to be ever present in your mind. Family support is incredible. By the way, I want to take this opportunity to thank George's husband, David, who came from New York to help us. Speaking of family support, he's made our event much more possible. David, wherever you are, thank you. So to remember to consider that not only is her family part of the journey, but your family might also be part of the journey. When our surrogate mother, Shannon, was pregnant, my mother and my sister and I would go down and visit. And it really made it a different experience. It made it very real that she knew she wasn't just creating a son for us, she was creating a grandson for my mother and a nephew for my sister. And support from you and your family will help to boost this kind of motivation. And that is something that you will negotiate with her in the process. She may feel more comfortable having, no more than one interaction a week with you, or 2 Skypes a month with you. That's something that you will be able to speak with about her. But your presence and your support in her journey is very important. It's also important, if you can, and I know logistically it may be more difficult for you all, to visit your surrogate mother, to be there for some of the more important medical appointments, the first sonogram, to hold her hand when you can, and to let her know that you are as invested in the journey as she is. And also to adjust your expectations. And I say this next slide with a little bit of personal experience. I tend to be a little controlling in type A, and it was a very important realization for me to know, and somebody mentioned it in the movie yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. One of the surrogate mothers in the movie mentioned it, that while that is your child, it is her pregnancy. And it's a very important distinction to make, to support that process for her, and to understand that her doctors are there for her. They're there for the health of the child, but she is their patient. You are not their patient. And when you can make that distinction and help support her through that, it makes the journey so much easier. There will be stresses. There will be uncertainty. There will be medical issues that come up. There will be financial issues that come up. And oftentimes what that does for the intended parents is that it exposes their vulnerabilities and their inability to control this situation. It's important to understand that that's probably going to happen. And understanding how you deal with stress and how your partner deals with stress is going to mitigate some of those problems. You may have different ways of looking at it. You may have different ideas and understandings of having your own biological family, depending on who the biological father is going to be, if you're going to have twins and have embryos implanted with both biological material from the parents. But there may be different motivation levels on the part of the parents. And this is all really good information to discuss before entering into a relationship with a surrogate mother. Your friends and family are going to be part of the journey, and they're going to want to support you, but they may start bugging the hell out of you. Understand that there's a grandmother and a grandfather who are chomping at the bit, waiting for their grandson or granddaughter to arrive. That might be really great and exciting, but sometimes it might put a little extra stress on your relationship. Their support, and I can tell you, if there are any theoretical problems that your families may have with you having a child with a surrogate mother, the instant that that child is in their arms, that all goes away. And it becomes like any other grandchild that they've ever wanted in their entire lives. And the last thing, I don't know whether this is a cultural issue here. It seems to be a little bit of a cultural issue in the United States, Don't be afraid to ask for help. If you are dealing with a situation that you feel is overwhelming, if you're working with an agency, talk to the social worker with the agency. That's what they're trained for. Or you can seek someone individually to help you through the process. Certainly your surrogate mother or your egg donor would be doing the same thing. So I believe now what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion, a brief discussion. We're going to bring up Sane and we're going to tell you a little bit about, we're going to switch to the PowerPoint presentations here. And we're going to give you an overview of one of the other amazing options for parenting here in Europe, and that's adoption. Yes.
Good morning. Well, good morning, guys, I can say. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak a little bit about adoption as an option of building your family. My name is Sanne. I'm from the Netherlands. And I founded a New Way adoption agency. Traveling the roads of infertility, I can relate to many of the questions that you guys have, and that's that family and parenthood does not particularly have to come easy. You have to educate yourself, research yourself, make difficult decisions, and also sometimes face bigotry. But sticking with your dream is was very rewarding for me, and I hope it will be for you too. Much like the Men Having Babies organizations, we found out, my husband and me, that it was very difficult to find the right information along the path of adoption. And that's one of the reasons I founded a New Way adoption agencies. We have adoption from the USA is possible in many countries from Europe. We only help Dutch people, but you can refer to me later on if you have any questions about that, and I can bring you into contact with the right organization. So please bear with me if you're not from the Netherlands. I will give an example of how it works in our country. Well, not many countries of origin allow same-sex couples to adopt. I'm not going into the political discussion on that, but personally I feel it's a shame because I think same-sex couples should be allowed to provide forever families for children in need. Currently, same-sex adoption is allowed in most European countries, although domestic adoption is very rare. Inter-country adoptions are allowed in Portugal, South Africa, and the USA. And in Holland, we have had many years of experience in placing children with same-sex couples. How it works in the Netherlands is that you apply for a BKA number, that's an adoption number. You get yourself educated on the issues concerning raising a child and adoption. Then you receive formal approval from our Child Protection Services and the Ministry of Justice, and then you choose a licensed adoption agency, such as a New Way. We are one of the 5 Dutch adoption agencies. We are licensed since 2011. We're specialized in the USA. We placed over 80 children at this point, and about 30% of those children were placed in same-sex families. We work with 4 partners. Michael Goldstein, he will also be available on Skype later on to ask questions directly to him. Adoption Arc, Home at Last, and Heart of Adoptions Alliances. How does adoption in the USA work? Well, it starts when a family is pregnant and does not know what to do with their child and is not able to care for it themselves. They start looking for solutions and help and guidance, and one of them could be adoption. They have 2 opportunities. They can either let it be adopted through the state, Child Protection Services, or do it privately. And some of the birth families choose the last option because it gives them the opportunity to select the adoptive family. So that means that they will be able to have ongoing contact also. Private placements, they are also involved in the selection, and after option counseling, and that sounds like a little step, but it takes for months, they choose if they want to place or not. Why do people choose to adopt from the USA? Well, there are many children in need in the USA, 500,000 in foster care, 150,000 children eligible for adoption. It's a Western country. with high standards and procedures, and that's something that a lot of adoptive parents really appreciate, because it's a difficult process you have to go to with a lot of legal loopholes, much like surrogacy, so you have to be careful on what steps you tread. The possibility of having a lot of medical, social, emotional background information, and most of all, the contact with the birth family. I myself have an open adoption relationship with both the biological families of my children, and I find that very rewarding for my children, for them, but also for myself. Okay, facts and figures. Cost of an USA adoption process is between 35,000 and 65,000. We are very clear on that, and you can also find it on internet. Nothing wrong with that. Plus the cost of the Dutch procedure. There's also risk involved, as there is in any process of becoming a parent, whether that is through pregnancy or through adoption. But specifically in this case, a mother can change her mind. She can eventually choose to parent herself, as it is her child. In 85% of the intended matches, the placements will follow through. We've had a total of 84 placements with 28 same-sex couples, so it's about an average of 30%. And currently, 30% of our couples that apply for an adoption is also same-sex. So much like in other instances, you have the same chances of becoming parents as a heterosexual couple. Okay. That was my story. If you have any questions to ask, you can refer to us. We have I don't know where we're going to be.
We have time for a couple of questions, either for Sonny or for ourselves. So I think...
Shall I sit down?
Yeah, so okay. No, yeah, why don't you sit down and we can take, I think we have about 5 or 10 minutes for... Yeah, we have about 5 or 10 minutes. So any questions? We will have... We will have more presentations about some of the topics that already came up. So naturally, if you are waiting to hear more in the other presentations, that's fine. If you have specific questions specifically to Sonny or to something we mentioned that you think might not be coming up later, we can try to answer it now.
Yeah, I have two different questions. One is for the doctor here, also for the institution. Is there... So, about sharing eggs, is that possible to know other families that are sharing with you the eggs, or is this something that won't be possible?
That's an excellent question. I have to admit, I don't know the answer. Anybody in the audience knows?
Yeah, I can answer that. To benefit from the option of sharing eggs with other sharing eggs, you have two options. Some clinics would require you to be synchronized to another couple that wants to use the eggs at the same time, and you do not need to know them necessarily. You might choose to or be able to, but most often you don't need to know them at all. Other clinics will be able to allow you to share eggs by possibly freezing the other half, in which case you don't have the coordination of the need to coordinate the time. If you're more concerned about the fact that other kids will have the same biological genetic connection to the same egg donor, you need to know that egg donors typically can donate up to 5 times. So it doesn't even matter about the sharing eggs. You could be taking the entire egg, cycle, and still there could be 3 or 4 or 5 other couples who have benefited from that egg donation on other times, and there will be kids who are half biologically related to each other. There are sometimes clinics where people say, I'm coming from a small country, I really want to know who else is using the same egg donor. Sometimes they can, sometimes they cannot accommodate you.
Thanks. And the second question is mostly for adoption, to know about timing of adoption. How long it takes from...
Yeah, okay. At this point, for our couples, the same-sex couples have the same chances as the heterosexual couples, and the average mediation time is 8 to 10 months after intake at our adoption agency. But there's a range, and that is from 2 weeks to 2 years, because it has to do with also when the birth parent chooses you, so when the right match comes along. But in general, it's between 8 or 10 months.
Any more questions for Sonny, especially? And she will, I have to say that she will have a breakout session at 3 o'clock at Brel. And so once again, many of these issues will be able to be addressed at that point. So if you don't have any more questions, we are actually intentionally ahead of schedule. So we will have our coffee break now.